Hello, I'm Lynn Richardson, I'm the Director of HR. And welcome to this online training about the new appraisal policy, which comes into being from the 1st of April 2014. You're about to watch a set of slides which will take about an hour to get through, and this will give you some helpful tips on how to rate your employees' performance over the past year and award them a performance score which will determine whether or not they receive incremental progression. It's also going to give you some helpful principles about the policy and the changes that have happened in relation to the old one. If at the end of this training you still have questions, or if you're unsure how to proceed with the policy, then do talk to your line manager or your HR business partner who'll be able to support you. Thank you. Okay, so welcome everyone to the appraisal training today, which is about you being able to understand the new responsibilities for you as a line manager in conducting appraisals going forward with our new appraisal policy, which comes into being from April 2014. There are going to be some key elements that are different in our new appraisal policy to the one that you're familiar with now, and today's session will take you through all of those changes. What's really important about doing this training is that you don't begin this e-learning training if you haven't actually ever done the basic appraisal training. So today I'm not going to be talking with you at all about the routine skills of conducting appraisal. This is going to be about the specifics of being able to rate your employees' performance and therefore give them an incremental progression or not, as the case may be. So the first part of today's training is going to be about the changes, and one of the first things that you'll notice when you've read the appraisal policy is that we are introducing leadership competencies. So people will be assessed in the future not just on how technically competent they are to do their role, but how they lead and develop their teams. There's also a focus on behaviours, so it's not just about how you do your job, but the way you go about it. So it's not just about being very good at delivering your objectives. If you've caused a lot of mayhem and upset with your team in delivering that, then that's an issue. So it's thinking about people's behaviours as well as their technical competence to do the job. We're going to be taking in some feedback as part of the assessment process. The appraisal policy requires everyone to have feedback once in a 3-year period. But if people wish to do that more frequently, if part of their personal development there's a feeling that they actually could do with a little bit of feedback around a particular aspect, that's fine. But at least once every 3 years that will happen. And for the first time, as a result of the Agenda for Change, change of terms and conditions that came into force from April 2013, incremental progression is not going to occur because of the length of service in the future. It will be based on undertaking a good standard of performance. So that's not just an okay job, you've got to be doing better than okay to get your increment in the future. Quite a significant change that came in with the Agenda for Change terms and conditions was linked to the most senior bands in our organisation. So that's the 8C and upwards. And the top 2 highest incremental points have to be annually earned in the future, and there is an ability to go backwards on your pay if you're not doing a good job. So that is quite a significant change. And then we're going to be making sure that we use generic competencies, the knowledge and skills framework, to make sure that we've got a fair process for assessing people's performance. And for some people, that's in addition to the leadership competencies. So our most senior managers will have technical competence detailed as well as their leadership performance. And what it's going to enable all our employees to do is at the end of their appraisal year, have a rating from their manager on performance. And I think for a lot of people that's a positive, because we know from our staff survey feedback that sometimes our employees have left their appraisal and they're not quite clear on how their manager really feels about their performance and whether they're doing a good job. So all the basics of thanking people for a good year, that all still happens, but people are actually going to know how their manager rates their performance. Also, as we go forward with rating people's performance, we're going to be able then to identify, if our managers all rate people in a consistent way, who are our highest performers. That's going to enable us then to think about those people as our future talent for leadership roles going up. And we have got a leadership development programme. So every year, the different 4 tiers of leadership can have a leadership development. 12 people on a cohort can go forward on a leadership development programme. And that will enable us then to think about those people getting into different roles to recognise their performance and enable them to progress in their careers. So there's some real positives coming out of this too. There's an aspiration within HR as well that as we recognise who our high performers are sort of people who rate 3 and 4, that actually we will give them acting up opportunities, so that, you know, now at the moment, often acting up happens because somebody leaves in a particular team and it's just logical, but actually we'll be able to identify people who are ready for promotion and think about putting them into the acting up opportunities instead. So there are some real positives in this. I don't know if when you did your preparation for today's course, you noticed the grandparent role. So the grandparent is your line manager. So for the employee you review, they are sort of 2 steps away. And we've introduced the role of the grandparent to make sure that where we're thinking about deferring incremental progression, there is a discussion with the grandparent, and the grandparent is satisfied that the not recommending incremental progression is appropriate. So we anticipate as a result that we will have a fair process that is assured by the use of the grandparent. There is going to be a requirement to make sure you review the personal development at year end to ensure, one, that the training that you organised with your employee has been appropriate, that it has grown somebody's skills, but also if there is a shortfall, we recognise that and address it. Any questions after those few points we've talked about? So on our agenda today, we'll be looking a little bit more on the leadership competencies. We'll be thinking about the information that you as a line manager need to draw together in order to be able to rate your employees' performance. We're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about how you give that clear message to your employee where their performance is an issue for you. We'll think about then using the Oracle Learning Management self-service to record your appraisal review data in the system. Ultimately, that's going to mean you don't have to do the monthly return that we do currently each month for appraisal compliance. And we'll look a little bit about the liaison with your grandparents. So this is where we'll pick up really the principal changes that are occurring in the new appraisal policy. So our organisation, our trust, developed leadership competencies probably 18 months ago. And we have 5 distinct areas that we will be focusing on for the people who are in a leadership role. And for some of you, you may not have been familiar with the tiers of leadership in our organisation. And so level 1 is our highest level, and those are our trust board directors. So there's 5 of them, and they are our level 1 leaders. Then we have level 2 leaders. These are people on the executive board and those who report to a board director. Level 3 leaders broadly fall into people who are multiple team managers. So service managers who look after several departments or areas, matrons who look after several wards. These will be our level 3 leaders. And then people who are single team managers are our level 4. So we've broadly identified people by their role as having a leadership responsibility. It won't always be about banding. And this is something that when we were running the first pilot training, some of our managers found difficult to understand because they wanted it to be divided neatly into people's bandings. I think probably for most people, maybe band 6 is perhaps the level where leadership potentially could start, or 7. But for some areas, they may have supervisors who manage a team on a band 5. So it's not just about banding, it's about thinking about whether you are a single team manager with responsibility for leading a group of people. So just to get that message clear. Okay, has anyone got any questions at that point?
With regards to band 2s and 3s, and in my case healthcare assistants, I've got quite a few, if they are scoring 4s, would they be able to go onto the leadership programme?
The Leadership Development Programme is for people really who are managing a single team, which clearly for a healthcare assistant they're not. So actually it would be other rewards and opportunities for them. So I'm sort of thinking that actually the first thing might well be that you highlight that they're ready for acting up opportunities, and that would be one way of rewarding. Then I think there's also the opportunity that they be recommended for registered nurse training programme. And it could well be as well that they represent the team at some perhaps external events if you think that's appropriate for their level. But it's not until they're getting to that point where they're going to manage a team that they would go onto the Leadership Development Programme.
Lynn, on the point of the Leadership Development Programme, within our integrated teams we have a number of colleagues who are actually employees of the County Council and therefore subject to a different appraisal process. If we're using this process to identify people for developmental opportunities, including the leadership programme, how will we be able to include that cohort of staff, if indeed we can?
I think we should, because these people are instrumental in helping to lead the teams that deliver care for people who use our services. So I think they would fill in the, if there's support of yourself, that they go on to that leadership development programme, they would apply just like any other of our employees if they're working in our services. And then obviously it would be subject perhaps to competition if we have more than the 12 we need for the cohort. So
Thank you.
yeah, they should go forward. So you can see we've got strategic leadership. So that's about how well our managers drive change, set vision and direction for people, take through the trust messages to ensure that they create a good message for our employees to get them motivated to help deliver our trust agenda, what we want to achieve. Then we've got around how our leaders engage and motivate their workforce, how they recognise difference and harness passion so that people who are really keen and enthusiastic to do a piece of work are empowered to go on and do that. And you can see those different elements that make up the engaging and motivating section. Then there's something about performance leadership, actually making sure that the right things do get done. So that obviously in appraisal terms readily translates into the objectives, but in a year there's so many other things that need to get done other than the things that are formally set in the objectives. So there's something about over the year, how much do your leaders drive forward good performance and really sort of take forward the trust's objectives for the year. And then the last two elements, track record and personal motivation, those are used probably more in the recruitment process, but still there will be something about you looking at the experiences and the overall knowledge of your employees and using the personal development plan to make sure that the track record and the experiences demonstrate that people are in the right roles. So that's the leadership competencies. And that will enable you to assess the contribution that the individual makes to leading their team. We use them, as I said just now, both in our assessment centre, but we will go on and use those in the development centre. So you remember I talked about that cohort of 12 individuals who we think are ready for promotion. We will look with them at their competencies, how they match that to help develop them to be ready for that next level. And so what we're saying really is that our appraisal process is moving away just from objectives to looking more at the wider employee issues around their competencies and their ability to do their role and potentially the next level of role. So then when we think about our managers, there is that element which is about their leadership potential, but then there is also just their technical competence to do their role. And in some ways the objectives tell you something about the technical competence, but we'll also be using the core competencies of the knowledge and skills framework. And those are detailed in Appendix 7 of the appraisal policy. So we have within each section of that core competence, communication, person and people development, health, safety and security, service improvement, quality and equality and diversity. And at Appendix 8, we tell you broadly what level your employees should be attaining according to their agenda for change banding. So you can look at level 4, that will be roughly your band 8As and above, and it goes down to levels 1 and 2, which will be for your bands 2s and 3s. So that there is a spectrum there, and that's detailed quite accurately in Appendix 8. So you can use that to, with your employee, agree the level of technical competence they should be attaining. And that document, for some of you that remember the knowledge and skills framework, you might be thinking, oh no, it is refined, and it is it gives you some very helpful indicators around unhelpful behaviour or things that you may see in your employee that mean they're not meeting that competence too. So, and one of the things that we've debated a lot around using the KSF is that we don't want to go back to this bureaucratic process of people hunting for reams of paper. It's enough that people come and discuss with you how they think they demonstrate that competence. And if you've been doing your supervisions throughout the year, you will have a good idea that what people are telling you is actually accurate. So,
and that Appendix 8, Lynn, replaces the individual profiles that we used to have for each role.
Yes. So I think for some areas, I think our therapies area in particular, they use it a lot. They may want to have some additional competencies added and develop a little bit more than the standard profile. But in the main, we're just saying we'll use those generic levels for all employees. We don't have individuals able to draw up those profiles. So it's taking quite a pragmatic approach in that respect. But just a couple of things to sort of guard against. So you may get a new recruit into a band 7 post, for example, and you think that person should be at, for the foundation standard, level 3. But if they're new in role, they may not quite be at that standard. And you need to recognise that for a new recruit, that could be the case. However, you also need to think about if they were a year on to year 2 and nothing has changed, then that's not helpful, and that's probably an issue for you around performance for that individual. So just 1, be mindful of your new employee and giving some leeway, but then 2, if somebody hasn't grown their skills and shown that they are looking more competent than they were last year, that's a cause for concern, and one in which you need to be taking some action to address that with the employee, either through a personal development plan, or maybe you may be starting to think about the capability procedure for that. So, just guard against that when doing your assessment of the employee. Any questions on that so far? No? All making sense at the moment? So, I thought that this might be quite a helpful slide for you to consider. So, it's a performance grid. So on the vertical axis, you can see this is about high performance. So this is about the person who has been striving to deliver all their objectives and who is focused on going forward with achieving tasks over the year. And 4 is the highest and 1 is the lowest in this respect. Then along the bottom axis, we've got our values. So this is the manner in which an employee goes about achieving their tasks, how they communicate with people, how they engage with their colleagues, keep people joined up on their communications, coach and develop people to give a go at doing different things, that their whole behaviours. And what we're looking to strive to do within our appraisal process is rank people's performance. So at the very top right-hand corner is where we would see our person who scores the highest level for their performance and the highest level for how they go about their role. So they're our top talent, they score a 4 in both respects. They would get their incremental progression if they were on an incremental scale. Similarly, at level 3, we've got people who are almost there. They're working towards it, and you're very confident in their performance. You can leave them to get on with their roles, and you know that they talk respectfully to their employees and their colleagues, and you're almost satisfied with everything they're doing. In the yellow area, that's level 2, these are our employees who would not be getting incremental progression if that's how you rate their performance this year. And they're doing an okay job. So this may be your employee who, when you sit down with them and look at their KSF, you look at their PDP, and you see that actually they haven't moved forward. They're the same as they were last year. They haven't actually perhaps completed all their objectives. We're going to come on and look at that in a moment, how we would rate them. But they're doing nothing more than okay. And that is a significant change in our policy going forward. An okay job does not give you your next increment. You've got to be doing a good job. So you've got to be making a difference to the trust. And then at level 1, you've either got the person who has been racing forward and getting all their tasks done, but they have really caused some upset. They may be somebody that you've been taking through the capability procedure anyway. They could be someone who has had a final written warning and their behaviours are totally unacceptable in the trust, for example. So you will have a range of people. They will, I suspect, in most instances be people you already know about. They're already on your radar. You're perhaps managing them through different processes. So that's how that grid will help you when you're going through and looking at the evidence you've got, when you're considering what your employee has told you about where they feel they have done a good job this year. You'll be looking to try and fit them onto that grid somewhere to help you rate their performance. Any questions or observations about that?
In the level 2, I mean, I have got quite a few staff that are on the top of their banding.
Yes.
I mean, that's always a challenge to try and keep them motivated and for them to, take on new roles and to progress.
Mm-hmm.
I know we are going to talk a little bit more about people that might fall into level 2.
Yes.
But I would be, interested to know what support we might get with that particular group of people.
Okay, so that's a person who is doing an okay job, but as far as you're concerned, they're not contributing to the team. Yes, they've
lost their motivation.
Yes.
They don't feel that they're going anywhere else, or they don't want to go
Yeah.
anywhere else.
Yeah.
They're at the top.
Yeah.
Or they could be working towards the end of their
Yeah.
working life.
Yeah.
People.
So I think there it is about you being absolutely honest with your employee that that's how you see their performance. It's not where you would want it to be. You would want them to be trying to get themselves into that level 3 performance, and that you might set some more stretching objectives. Perhaps there's an element for you as a manager of thinking, oh, they're not going to be interested in leading on this piece of work, and so you actually don't give them challenging objectives. Maybe that's what you need to do a little bit more. We'll think about that. I think we are in a situation where it will be very difficult for people on a top of an agenda for change scale that isn't the most senior that you could demote. Their performance probably is not bad enough to warrant going on to a capability procedure. I think that over time we will look to address that, but at the moment it is going to be about you setting some more stretching objectives, but also being really honest with people in your conversation and summing up with them that actually their performance isn't to the level you would want it to be, that you don't feel they're actually doing more than the basics, and for their experience, they're top of the scale, they've got years of experience, they should be agreeing to coach or mentor a junior, they should be doing more for the team. I think perhaps for a lot of our employees, they haven't actually had that message said to them. I don't know if that's the case with you, but anyway, we can think about that when we come to that in the next section. But I agree that that probably is an area that we will need to do more with and address going forward. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, and I've put the visions and values wheel up here just to remind you all that we've got some guiding principles when we do appraisal. So we must operate within the sort of the principles of our visions and values. So we're going to be fair, honest with individuals. We've got to make sure we do that in a respectful way and an empathetic way. So it's not very nice to hear from anybody that actually your job is not, you're not performing it to the standard that your manager would like. And that can be said honestly, but still respectfully. So it's just reminding people about that. And also our duty to think about any reasonable adjustments. So if somebody does have a long-term health condition, they're maybe not going to be able to do the full remit of their role. And if you as a manager have made those reasonable adjustments, you need to do that too when you're doing your assessing. So it can still be that actually somebody who's got a long-term health condition does only reach a 2 on the performance scale, but you would just need to make sure you had, when making your summing up, recognise that they did have more absence than perhaps our usual amount of absence we would tolerate for an employee, or that their physical health limited them from doing every aspect of their role, and not mark them down accordingly if we recognise that. So it's just to remind you about that element. Okay, so we've sort of finished that background to some of the key changes, and we're going to go on now and look at the preparation for the appraisal review meeting and how you are going to be able to rate your employees' performance. So it's logical that the first thing that you might be wanting to think about when you come to reflecting on the year for your employee is the achievements that they have managed to do. So you would have done the 6-month review, so you'd have had an idea where the objectives were, and hopefully you're going to see them completed. But have a reflect back on how much support you've been giving that person throughout the year. I mean, it's not wrong to give anyone support. We give our employees support all the time. But if you've actually had to take control of an objective, if you've had to actually guide them, perhaps unnecessarily so for the level of their band, then that might be beginning to ring a bit of a sort of an alarm bell for you. Think about the compliments you might have had, or have you had managers coming into your office and saying, I'm not happy about how this is going at the moment. I think you might need to intervene because this has gone on, or whatever. So you do need to make sure that as a basic principle, you are keeping good notes in your supervisions month on month, because that's going to be one of the first things you're going to go back and review. Then you want to think about having a review of the KSF outline. So looking at Appendix 7, looking at your banding of your employees, so you know broadly where you want to see them, and you can review the behaviours that are listed there. And cast your eye over the negative behaviours too, and think, have I seen any evidence of that? And then think about the observed behaviours that you have actually seen in the team meetings, just at general visits, how people have been talking to people who are using our services, whether or not there have been complaints from people who use services or their relatives. You will have a good level of knowledge about the performance of your employee before you start looking at the detail of either the KSF or the leadership competencies. Feedback comes into the new appraisal policy, and the policy says that this will be driven by the employee. Now, employees are not allowed to choose their friends to give their feedback. So Appendix 3 and 4 in the policy guides the employee on how to prepare for their appraisal, and there's a section on feedback, and there's also a section for you as a manager on the feedback section. But basically the employee is going to choose 2 people, hopefully somebody outside of the immediate team, as well as somebody from, well, it could be 2 people outside, within, however the employee wants to choose it, and you need to choose one other and advise the employee that this is the person that you would like them to get feedback from. And that feedback will detail for the employee their strengths, what the person has sort of found really helpful in their how they've delivered their tasks, their behaviours. It will give some indication of where they think they have a weakness or an area for development. And if they think they've got some development, they might outline how they think that could work. So it's just giving you some other perspective. And as I said earlier, at least once every 3 years, and it can be more frequent. For our more senior leaders, those who feature on our levels 1 to 4, they will also have the opportunity of a formal 360-degree feedback. And again, that will be done once every 3 years. So it must happen once every 3 years. It can happen more frequently if people wish it to. And that's going to be a little bit different for us to what we normally do. Any questions on that element of it? And so this is a page out of the appraisal policy, the form, and you can see we've talked already about the performance scores, and they break down into the first one being the individual objectives for the past year, and it might be helpful if we now take a look at the document that you were sent in advance of the course, the principles for evaluating. And so under the individual objectives for the past year, Within the guide, I have suggested that if all the objectives have been delivered successfully and to a high standard, then it would be appropriate to rate 4 there for the individual objectives for the past year. If all but one of the objectives have been achieved and delivered successfully, but you might have had to give some significant support for 1 or 2 of those objectives, then you might want to award a 3 here. Where you're seeing partial delivery of 2 of the objectives or more, and 2 have been delivered, then it would be appropriate to mark that down as a 2. And anything less than that, partial delivery of several objectives but nothing completed, it would be a 1. So that would be my suggestion of how you would rate your first element there. So how this form works is you would then, using this document, go forward and then think about the professional behaviours and leadership, the achievement of the personal development plan, the review of their technical competence against the KSF outline, and the feedback that you've received. And you would rate each of those from a 4 to a 1, depending on the success of your employee in the past year. In relation to the personal development plan, it is really important that the statutory and mandatory training is reviewed as part of that. It's a key driver in the Trust for making sure the quality of our services are delivered to the highest possible standards. And it's not acceptable that somebody comes to that annual appraisal and they are not up to date. If they've got more than 1 of their statutory mandatory training not compliant, then level 2 is the minimum that they could get for that. Sorry, the maximum they could get for that. So do remember to check that out, that record. The Manager Self-Service Oracle Learning Management System will give you a compliance matrix. So as part of your preparation for the appraisal, you will be able to review that compliance matrix and just check where they're at. And at the end of it, it could well be that the professional behaviours and leadership is not assessed because they're not in a leadership role. So you would either then divide your score by either 4 or 5 elements, and you would come up with a score. But you do not round up. So if you came up with a score of 2.6, that is not a 3, okay? So it's important that you recognise that.
And do you do this before the appraisal? Would you, as a manager, have had a view in terms of looking at all this information as part of your planning and do a sort of preliminary score?
Yes, I think you would. I think as part of your preparation, you would be having a rough idea of where you think you're at. But of course, the employee is going to come to you and they will either explain to you some of the complications that were outside of their control. So, for example, you may not have realised that they didn't complete an objective, but actually there was a financial issue and the funding didn't come through from the commissioners or whatever, and it didn't happen. So I think you would have done a preliminary assessment, but you shouldn't, I don't think, have written it up at that point. You should be waiting for your employee to come and discuss the different issues with you. And you would have had the feedback. The process asks that the 3 people selected for feedback email back their response to both the employee and yourself. So you've got that in advance. You've been doing supervision with your employee the whole year, so you've got a good idea of where people are on their KSF profile. So I think it's definitely worth doing some analysis, but not to set that in tablets of stone till you've actually done the review and had a discussion on that.
And would you feed that score back at the appraisal, or would it be that you would go away and then produce the score? Because you say it has to be the grandparent review.
Yes.
As well.
So I think that actually at the appraisal, you would be saying to your employee, actually, I have got concerns about your performance. I've heard a lot from you today. I mean, I think if it was a level 3 or a level 4, you probably could do that there and then. If it's somebody who you're not quite sure are they level 2 or level 3, I do think actually in the appraisal you've got to be honest with the employee at the time and say, I have got concerns about your performance. I'm not quite sure where you're fitting given the evidence you've told me today. I think you could be a level 2. You may just have moved into level 3. So I'm going to go away and write this up and share it with you. But if you were going to do that and then the employee was a level 2, I think you would have to ask them to come back and meet with you to give them the verdict. I don't want anybody to be hiding behind doing this remotely through emails. We've got to give our employees the courtesy of talking to them face to face. So I think when it is between point 2 and 3, it's probably going to need a little bit of reflection on your part to assimilate all the information you've been told and check where you're at. That then does give you the opportunity to have the discussion with your grandparent to say, actually, look, I've looked at this and I'm thinking this is a 2. They've told me this, that and the other. Do you think that's fair? Have I missed anything? And have that consistency check, really, I think. So, no, it's a really good question. Thank you for that. I think it's important that we get that clear for managers.
The training that I've done previously, I mean, I've always been told that really there shouldn't be any surprises for the employee.
Yes. Yes.
But I'm not sure if that's, are we still going down that road?
Yes, that there shouldn't be surprises. So I guess that's just about how honest people are with people on a monthly basis in their supervision. So if you weren't happy about how somebody was doing a particular piece of their role, you should be saying that. You shouldn't be going, oh, that's fine in supervision. I think where the appraisal training says about no surprises, I think formally some people would go into appraisal and their manager might say to them there and then, actually, this is hopeless, your performance, I'm going to take you down the capability procedure. That is a real surprise to someone who thought they were doing an okay job. I don't think we're going to be in that situation because I think that there may be some element of surprise between being rated a 2 or a 3 for some employees. They may think okay is good enough and they're going to hear that actually okay is not good enough. But there's not going to be a significant surprise for people of the way that has been previously described, I think. Yeah, I do think it is about the quality of supervision. That makes people aware that actually I'm disappointed about how you're dealing with this at the minute. We've got to get to grips with this and get this task completed or whatever. I think that's got to get, that sort of conversation needs to happen in supervision. So it's not a surprise to people if they do then get a 2 and not a 3. And similarly for the lady we were talking, or the employee we were talking about earlier, who's doing an okay job, when you do the 6-month review, there's an opportunity there to say, I'm a bit worried that you haven't made a start on any of these objectives yet. They don't feel to me like you're anywhere near progressing those. You've only got another 6 months. And there is a risk here for you that you're going to get a level 2 at your next appraisal if you don't put some effort in here. And I think that's what we were talking about, really. It was people putting in an effort, wasn't it, and being motivated to help contribute to new things for the team.
And can I just clarify the grandparent review? So when you've decided, you've heard everything, you've decided on the score that you believe is appropriate for the individual, is it subject to the grandparent reviewing that information before you can confirm that is the score?
Yes, I would say it is. I think you must do that because part of the grandparent review is that they check on what you're basing your decision. So it's not, I don't think it'd be appropriate for you to do it, advise the employee and then go and check with the grandparent who says, look, you've missed a significant issue here. And I can see that for some people, perhaps where absence has been an issue, a lot of sickness absence, that may have impacted. I could see that some managers may think, oh, well, they haven't achieved it too. But actually, if somebody had a long-term health condition, had absence, we would be wanting to make an adjustment. And that might be just the sort of adjustment we would need to make.
So in terms of the ownership of the manager, would you be saying, my view is, based on what I've heard, is that you're a level 2?
Yes.
However, it is subject to review by the grandparent.
Yeah.
So it will go to the grandparent and then I will confirm the
it,
score.
yes.
Because I think, some managers could say, I'm not sure, I'm going to give it to the grandparent and they can make the decision.
No.
And I think it's making sure that the managers still have that ownership around
Yes.
the performance of their
Yes.
staff.
I wouldn't expect the grandparent to get involved in 3s and 4s.
No.
They will
It's
be
just
more
that 2,
involved in
3.
2s and 1s. They may possibly get involved with a 4 if it's someone that they're not sure are they a 3 or 4, and it will mean they're on the leadership development programme or recommended 4. So, there can be a discussion, but in the main, the manager must make their decision on where they view them, and then if it is a 1 or a 2, go speak to their grandparent and make sure they've not missed anything and that they sort of agree with them that the level of performance is okay or not acceptable, really. Okay, so any questions in relation to the scoring?
Lynn, there's a scenario where you could score 3 3s and a 2, and the average would be 2.75, and it would seem quite harsh if we're not allowed to round up to make that a 2. How would we manage it in that situation?
Thank you for that question, Victoria. I think it's a situation in that instance where the mode score is actually a 3, which would warrant an increment. And so for me, I think that's the only situation where actually a discussion with the grandparent should be had. And if it's felt that actually overall that the performance in the last year warrants the increment, I think that's the one situation by the scoring that we would perhaps allow the person to progress through, though we would still score the score as 2.75, but we would recommend the incremental progression, I think.
And can I just ask, if a person scored exactly the same score the following year with a score of 2 in exactly the same element, what would happen then?
I think for me then, a second year, they wouldn't go forward with incremental progression if that was if that was still an option. Simply because you would expect with this process that the area where they'd scored 2 the year before, that a personal development plan had been undertaken, or the individual had taken steps to address whatever was the shortfall in their performance from the previous year. And so if they hadn't addressed that shortfall, then I don't think it would be appropriate that they got the incremental progression. You'd want to see then that shortfall addressed before they got that second year. Okay, so now moving on. I want us to think a little bit about structuring the summing up for the employee at the conclusion of the appraisal meeting. Okay, so we talked earlier on about the situation between a band 2 and band 3, where you may want to reflect on your final scoring. But using the template within the appraisal policy, you should go through each element of the appraisal, beginning with the achievement of the objectives, and work through systematically. Allow the employee to lead with their assessment and their evidence of the performance, and give them time to speak honestly about the evidence presented, and then talk about your observations. And they may conflict with how the employee views their performance. Ensure that your observations are across the whole year. Okay, it's well known that sometimes a singularly bad event a couple of weeks just before appraisal, or similarly a very good event, can actually have what's called the halo or horns effect on your assessment. So do make sure you look back over the whole year and your notes that you've made at different times, so that it really does reflect the performance of the last year. And as I said earlier, being compliant with the statutory mandatory training is key. If people aren't up to date and they've got more than 2 elements that are out of date, then an award of 2 in that area for personal development is all that could be awarded. So what I'm going to do now is show you a short video. It's from YouTube, and it features Daniel Newman, who's the chief exec of an IT company.
Having spent most of my career in startups and turnaround organizations, dealing with delivering bad news has been something I've become acutely familiar with, probably more so than I'd even enjoy to admit. However, it is part of being a leader. It's probably one of the parts that most leaders enjoy the least, but it is something that you have to be able to do. Now, if you read throughout the internet, you will get lists and lists of how to deliver bad news. And there's some very credible information out there, and there's some less than credible information out there. However, perhaps it's the minimalist in me, but I have knocked it down to about 4 things that I think are critical that every leader can do to deliver bad news better than the situation may allow. And here they are. 1, planning. Once you know you're going to have to give bad news, whether to an individual or to a group, I believe ripping the Band-Aid off is important. That means getting the news out, getting it out quickly, not being political, but really being focused on the purpose of the news. However, you do have to plan. You have to spend enough time to figure out what's the message, what is going to be considered success in terms of getting the message out there, and knowing this prior to saying anything to anybody. 2nd, brevity. This one is so underrated. Being brief is so important when giving bad news. If you've ever been delivered bad news or a message that wasn't ideal and you were given it by someone that just babbled and rambled, almost to the point where they sounded kind of like a bumbling fool, you know that that is not how you want to be given news. People would much, much rather hear it directly and quickly. Get to the point. 3, clarity. The line between brevity and insulting somebody really lies in clarity. So decide what you think is going to mean a clear delivery of your message. This goes back to your planning phase, but make sure the message is clear. So short, yes, but not so short that you don't actually get to the point. They need to walk away. You need to know what they should know. They need to know what you just told them. And the 4th thing is empathy. This is probably an important part of every facet of leadership. However, compassion and humanity is so important when giving bad news. You can't just treat people like they're not people just because what you want to tell them isn't what they want to hear. This is especially true when you're firing people, or you have to let people go, or demote, or pay cut, or even just give criticism to people. You have to realize that people are, sensitive beings. And even if they like to wear a really hard shell, chances are when you give that news, it's going to really hurt them. So in the end, there's a ton of tips and a ton of information out there on how to give bad news. But I really knock it down to 4 things. 1, plan your message. 2, get to the point and get there quickly. 3, be clear. Don't be so quick that you're not clear, so know the difference. And 4, be human. Treat people like you want to be treated. It is that simple. And if you do these 4 things, then you don't have to worry about the messenger being shot. You'll just be ending up giving a better message.
Okay, that was sort of sensible advice, wasn't it? And I think we could probably all empathise with listening to somebody going all around the houses when actually what people want to know is, in this process, how are you rating their performance? So again, thinking back to our visions and values, it is that empathy bit and having respect for people. If you've got to say to them, actually, on reflection, I think your performance is a 2 this year, and I'm not going to be recommending an incremental progression. But I think with a good personal development plan and you really knuckling down to doing X, Y, and Z, you won't be in that situation next year if you work, really hard and work towards what the team, whatever the issue is. I think there's always a positive message you can leave someone with, even if you're saying, actually, my look back on last year is such that I do think there's some room for improvement. Any reflections on that before we move forward? No? Okay, so just to confirm the message just given to you by Daniel, plan the information you're intending to deliver, which will allow you to do the following better. And do you remember we said that if you need that planning time, it may be that there is a gap between your initial discussion and coming back to tell the person you've decided that it is a 2 and not a 3. For others, you'll be able to give that message actually at the time, and the planning will come in your preparation for the appraisal. So thinking about being brief, a brief message gets quickly to the point. A slow build up to the message could be painful. And if in doubt, say less, okay? So that you feel you're just giving the clear message. As Daniel said, it could be insulting to be too brief, but so it's making sure you've got the point across about, you do have strengths. We've explored some of your strengths. However, my rating of your overall performance is that you do need to improve, whatever that might be. So be clear and be compassionate. As we've all been told bad things at times, and it's not nice to hear. But doing it the right way will hopefully motivate people to do better the following year. So having summarised your conclusions in relation to the performance of last year, you can explain to them that you'll complete the paperwork with the assessment, send it to them to review and sign. Emphasise that they can respond to that document with some suggested adjustments in relation to the discussions that you've had and to the evidence they presented. Advise them that you will be sharing the document with your manager, their grandparent, for review and comment. And then deliver a positive message at the end. Even if you're not recommending incremental increase, if they focus in on their role, work hard, it could be a different experience for them next year.
Then before moving on from that, there will be a scenario where staff will not agree with your outcome, and what recourse would they have?
Well, ultimately, the grievance procedure is there for someone to raise a concern. But I would hope that for the vast majority of people, they will recognise when all of the discussion happens that, yes, they haven't done their statutory mandatory training. Yes, they haven't delivered all of their objectives. So I'm hoping that through informal discussion, it wouldn't get to a grievance situation. But ultimately, if the grandparent had reviewed it and agreed with the manager that incremental progression didn't occur, if an employee was still aggrieved, a grievance could be raised. But that would be like the ultimate, and I'd be hoping that for the vast majority of people. And let's face it, there will only be a small percentage of our workforce where they may be in that 1 and 2. I would think a lot of our employees won't be in that situation. But yeah, grievance is ultimately the last recourse, really.
And sorry, just leading on from that, there potentially will be a view from some where they have not been recommended for an incremental increase, where they've scored a 1 or a 2, and a colleague may also be in the same situation of a 1 or 2 but already at the top of their scale. So there might be this perception of unfairness and them suffering a financial detriment whereas somebody else hasn't.
Yes.
How would we manage that scenario?
I think that's quite a tricky one because, you know, we've talked earlier today about the issue of the person at the top of the scale. But I guess I think for me, an employee has to understand that their manager has followed a consistent trust process. They've looked at all of the guidance that we've got out here today. And actually, if somebody's performance at the top of the scale is where they're at, you know, unless, I mean, they wouldn't know that a manager might be taking that employee on the top of the scale through a capability procedure. And I think we've just got to explain to them that this is on an individual basis. And whilst it may seem unfair, you know, I'm not at liberty to discuss with you what measures I may be taking with any other employee. I think while we are implementing and embedding this process, we will have some what look like potentially unfair situations. But in time, as our employees begin to understand that actually carrying on doing the same level of performance that you've done year in, year out is just not acceptable, people have got to make a difference. Actually, I would anticipate that perhaps we will see more performance issues being addressed with our employees, not necessarily formally, but people will understand where they've got to improve their performance. So then I hope we get to a situation where our employees don't feel that people at the top of the scale are actually in an unfair position, really.
And it's just popped into my mind, I'm sure that there will be some cynics who say that actually this is about saving money. How would you respond to that?
It's not about saving money. I mean, the Trust has a duty to actually follow the Agenda for Change Terms and Conditions guidance, and that says that in future nobody will have an increment because of length of service. So one, it's dictated to us to some extent, but also through our discussions with staff in the Changing Futures Forum, the overwhelming majority of our staff agree that you shouldn't get a pay award if you're not doing a good job. So I don't think that actually this is something that our staff aren't supportive of. But also, if you've had any involvement in the Changing Futures discussion, you'll know that we don't rule out where we can deliver a small surplus, that we might think about some way of rewarding our high performers. And so it's not, this actually is not about a cost improvement programme or a money saving scheme. It is about making sure that the right people get their increment and their reward, and those that aren't contributing enough in their role don't really. So, okay, now the next section is all about how at the end of your appraisal you go and enter onto the electronic staff record through manager self-service that you've done this appraisal and this review. And this is the bit that is the real big winner for managers, because you haven't got to do your monthly appraisal return once you've got your information into the system. So I'll just take you quickly through it. I don't know if all of you are familiar with manager self-service and how to do this, but so the first where the red arrow is, you click on the appraisal tab within manager self-service. You then click on the top left-hand button which says appraisals, and you'll have a screen like this open up. In the box where we've got the red arrow, you will click on standard appraisal and then onto the go button. And up will come a list of your employees. Okay, so you then select your appropriate employee on that screen. And you can see along the top here, you've got 3 buttons. And so the gold button tells you the point you're at, which is the setup details, okay? And just beneath that setup details, you can see you've got the name of your employee, Sam Jackson. Okay, so where you have review type, in the red print here, it tells you that you need to click on the drop-down box and select review. And then on the period start date, you select the start date of the period under review. So if you were going in on the 1st of April 2014 and you're looking back to the 1st of April 2013, April 2013 is the date you put in there, okay? And then the period end date is where you'd put 31st of March, date of your appraisal. So you would enter that in there. Then we're going to talk in a moment about the template, so I'll leave that for the moment. Appraisal date, this is the date the appraisal took place, okay? So you put that in, the date that you're doing it, the 1st of April 2014. And then next appraisal date is where you put 12 months hence. So like on the moment, on the appraisal monthly return, you put when the next appraisal review date is. So for that purposes, you'd put 1st of April 2015 or whatever it is. And then you would go down and put your name in as the reviewer. So coming back to the template, you have to search and select for a template. So where you see appraisal template, you click on put the percentage sign in and click go. And then beneath that, the second box, you'll see you select general review. So I'm not quite sure why within the electronic staff record process, but they don't call it appraisal, they call it general review. So you pick up general review. So then you can see that you've got a main sheet come up for Sam Jackson. You could at this point, if you wanted to, add objectives into the system. If you want to restore the objectives on there, you could do that. But actually, you don't need to do any more than that. At this point as well, you can see along the top screen, your overview button has now come up as gold to tell you you've done that bit. So you click on next, where we've got the red arrow. And you can then see it's put in all those dates, so the dates that we've just talked about. And you save and proceed, where the red arrow is. And then you have to complete appraisal. If you had put in the objectives there, you could click on share with the appraisee if you would rather. And then within the employee's self-service, the employee could look at what you put in there for the objectives. Click on continue and click on submit. And that would take you through the process. The very bottom line tells you that you've now completed the appraisal, and do you wish to exit, and you say yes. And then you'll be back to that screen, and you could actually go in and view others if you wanted to. So I think probably from that part of the process, you maybe just want to go back and have a bit of a play with that. When you do your next appraisal for one of your staff, have a go at doing it. The electronic staff record team would be there to support you with that as well. But also on the Trust intranet, there is a user guide for that, so you can pick that up off the intranet. But that just takes you through that.
Is that actually live now then? We can start to use that now?
Yes. If you haven't done your training though for manager self-service yet, you have. So you've got, we know that your hierarchy is set up. So yes, you could go in there and do that. So if you wanted to sort of, it might not be a bad idea to actually think about going back and entering for last year one of your employees in, so that as you do their appraisal, you could actually pick that up and do it that way.
Okay.
I mean, I think that, you know, it would be good to put some objectives in there if you wanted to, because you would keep a record on file historically then. So I think that's something that we might evolve over time on that, but it's early days in our rollout. So we're getting towards the end of the training now. So just to conclude, once the appraisal is complete, record the date of the appraisal into OLM together with your review date, and you can put the rating of the performance in as well. Has incremental progression been deferred? If so, then you're going to need to do the staff amendment form, send that on to payroll, and a helpful call in advance would be good, just so we know. You're going to need to make sure you do that at least a month before the incremental date. So you need to make sure you tailor your appraisals appropriately.
And on that point then, managers getting a list of staff's incremental dates?
Yes, yeah, we can run that out of the electronic staff record, so we'll be issuing that round. Go live for the appraisal training is 1st of April, and the electronic staff record team have got a note to do that for managers from during February. So, and then think about the learning development link to the PDP. Have you got that organised? So where some things are about coaching or support or shadowing, have you taken steps to get that organised? So just picking up, we've talked a little bit about the grandparent already this morning, but just picking up on that, having reviewed your evidence and documentation in preparation for the appraisal discussion, could be an idea if you've got an inkling that actually you've got concerns about an employee's performance over the last year, you might want to have a discussion with your grandparent at that time. Consider organising a discussion with your HR business partner too, if that would be helpful, to get their perspective on the evidence that you've got together at the moment. I think that's probably quite important as we're at the early stages of doing this, where you have concerns about an employee. Having undertaken the appraisal interview, listen to the opinion of your employee and advise them of your views that an incremental increase is not being recommended. You should make the employee aware that you will be sharing the appraisal information with their grandparent for their review. There is no right of appeal as such around the discussions with the two of you, but as we've said earlier, if the grandparent confirms your view that actually incremental progression isn't appropriate, then there is an ultimate right to raise a grievance on that one, okay? But we don't as such have an appeal process within the appraisal policy. So following this online training, if you have any questions, then please discuss with your line manager in supervision, or else refer to your HR business partner initially. They'll be able to help you to understand the issues and how to proceed. Okay, so that really concludes the course, but I'm just wondering, any last questions that people have?
Yes, please, Lynn. Currently, when I undertake appraisals, you kind of review last year's performance and then go into talking about objectives and PDP for the forthcoming year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering within this process, particularly if you're thinking of allocating a score of 1 or 2 to somebody, whether that second part of the process is better done later when there has been a period of perhaps reflection. I'm not sure that people will feel necessarily highly motivated to go into that second
I think that's a very sensible solution when somebody, when somebody's had discussions and you're saying, I'm afraid it is a 2 and I'm not going to recommend incremental progression. If they're feeling that actually they would like a break, then it would be a very good idea, I think, for you to both have a fresh pair of eyes on it, come back and then think about the development plan for that individual. I think it's probably, managers will make a judgment with the employee at the time. Some people will be happy to carry on and do it. But I would imagine where you've got performance concerns, you're probably going to have to do a little bit more work around the PDP, because you're going to need to understand where people can get booked onto training or shadowing or whatever it is they need to improve their performance. So, yeah, I think that's definitely an option that people could use if they find that would be helpful, really.
Thank you.